Electricity News presentation.
Good evening to you and a warm welcome to Interface. My name is Tembisa Machele. We've recently heard in the news that Eskom has been granted a 16% tariff increase for the 2012 to 2013 year. This is substantially less than the 25.9% that the power utility was originally granted by the National Energy Regulator of South Africa, otherwise known as Nersa. Now, government has also asked Eskom to cut tariffs in a bid to reduce the cost of doing business, especially for small, medium and micro enterprises or SMMEs. How will this affect Eskom's financial position and also its expansion plans? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's take a look at this insert produced by Colin Limawane.
The growing demand for electricity has left South Africa's power utility, Eskom, with an enormous challenge. The country needs to produce renewable energy through its capacity building process. According to the IRP 2010, which is a 20-year projection on electricity supply and demand, almost half of electricity generated in South Africa is required to come from renewable resources. As it stands, about 90% of energy comes from burning coal. This has a negative impact on the carbon footprint.
South Africa says it wants to reduce its emissions by, 35% or something like that, and then they go and build two massive coal power stations. So obviously they're contradicting themselves. I must just tell you quite honestly that carbon dioxide is going up in the atmosphere, and it's because of mankind that it's going up in the atmosphere, and coal power stations produce a lot of carbon dioxide. But from all of the science that I know, I don't believe that carbon dioxide is changing the climate in a dangerous way.
The National Energy Regulator of South Africa, Nersa, has so far approved a 25% tariff increase for Eskom. However, only 16% has been granted. This leaves Eskom with the problem of funding the shortfall.
It will have plenty of revenue. That will give it plenty of money for building all the more future power stations that we need. And from now on, we don't need to increase the price of electricity anymore. All we need to do is keep up with inflation, that's all.
Eskom has also to deal with the impact of coal-fired stations on the environment. The utility has to find ways of mitigating the environmental impact of increased emissions. Additional power stations like Medupi and Kusile are being built to meet the required capacity to generate power. According to Eskom, 385 billion rand has been set aside for facilities that will double the generation capacity by 2026. The project is expected to generate an additional 16,000 megawatts. The intentions are evident with the opening of the Ankerlig and Gorikwa open cycle gas turbine stations in 2007. While the plan has a profound outlook, the reality on the ground is contradictory. A significant number of South Africans still do not have access to electricity. Meanwhile, power outages are a big inconvenience to business.
It is not easy to recover after load shedding. In most instances, it manifests itself the loss manifests itself in various ways. First of all, there's a loss of customers who may not necessarily return to the business, and there's also direct and immediate impact on the bottom line, in the sense that revenue that you've lost today, you cannot hope to make it tomorrow. Because if you're a small business, let's suppose you bake fat cakes, or you use electricity to produce other goods that you sell on a daily basis. There's a finite number of goods that you can be able to produce on a particular day. So there's no way you can be able to expect that tomorrow or the following day, when the electricity is back, you'll now be able to manufacture double the amount of fat cakes that you're supposed to manufacture the previous day.
The music industry says it's affected by the outages. Native Rhythms is one of the independent recording companies in Johannesburg. They house and produce professional music artists daily, and this could inconvenience recording processes or short-circuit their expensive machines.
Electricity bills are very high. They are extremely high, and that makes the whole rent and everything become too high. So it is like a major problem. We have everything put in here. Imagine when the artist in the middle of the rehearsal, electricity goes off. I don't know whether you are familiar with sound and everything, but everything just like goes and makes noise, and there might be damage on other speakers or the PA system or anything else. So that really, it really translates into equipments and damaging the equipments also at the same time.
CAS says big business should compensate for exorbitant usage of power.
Big consumers of electricity should be penalized, should actually be paying punitive prices, unlike what is currently happening, where you find that they're actually given favorable rates in terms of pricing for electricity.
Meanwhile, Eskom has embarked on the 49M campaign, which aims to encourage households to save electricity during peak hours between 5 and 9 o'clock in the evenings. This is meant to minimize usage of geysers and pool pumps. Some consumers feel they could make a saving by opting to install prepaid meters. But will electricity be cheaper if they switch over? Colin Lemawan, Interface, Johannesburg.
Well, let's get into our discussion tonight. Joining me now to talk about Eskom's current position and also its future plans is Hilary Joffe, who is Eskom's spokesperson, and also Brian Statham, who is the chairman of the South African National Energy Association, or SANEA. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you.
Hilary, you heard those complaints in that tape. Everybody's a bit nervous about electricity supply in South Africa. You've also said, as Eskom, that 2012 will be a constrained year when it comes to power supply. Does that mean we should look forward to blackouts? Is the L word coming back? Load shedding?
We have not had load shedding, Tembisa, since April of 2008, and we are pretty determined not to go back there. But it is going to be a challenge because the balance between supply and demand is delicate, and particularly this year and even for years to come, until we get large new amounts of capacity on the national grid from Kusile and Madupi and our other power stations that we are building. So for the next couple of years at least, and particularly this year, the system is going to be tight.
You see, that's the part that makes us nervous, that particularly this year. What does that mean? You know, what kind of challenges can we expect in 2012?
I think it means we're working very hard as Eskom to make sure that we put the right measures in place to try and find that difficult balance. But we are also asking the country to work with us, to partner with us, and we do need help. We need help in terms of energy efficiency. We need support. We are calling on all South Africans to save at least 10% to enable us to run a stable power system while at the same time doing the maintenance we need to do on our power stations, which are getting rather middle-aged and need a lot more maintenance if they are to perform more reliably. So I think it's all those levers which we're trying to balance in the current year. We certainly see keeping the lights on as absolutely crucial for growth and development and for the quality of life of all of us. And it's something which we need to work together to do.
I hope that you're also speaking to government, that all of their buildings that are always lit the whole time will actually be switched off at night.
You'll have seen that, in fact, very recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was a government commitment by government departments and parastatals to work on energy efficiency.
Okay. Great stuff. Brian, let's bring you in here. In terms of just capacity, can Eskom really, with its aging infrastructure and everything else that is problematic at the power utility, can they really meet the demands of this country from a power supply perspective?
Well, Eskom is not able to do it on its own. And that's why the government has recently called for independent power producers to come into the mix. They've had the first round of tenders on that, and then the second round of tenders is currently open as well. So there's opportunity for Eskom to do things, and I believe that Eskom should be the baseload generators. They should focus on the baseload, and then the peak load and even the mid-merit stuff could easily be handed over to independents, and they could come in and make their contribution. But it's very difficult for independents even to come in because we don't have all the policies and all the rules and regulations are not yet clear.
From your perspective, do you think that Eskom is making it easy for those independents to come into the fold and to actually work with Eskom on this? Because some of the allegations against Eskom is that Eskom is just so happy being the monopoly in the sector that they're not making room for those IPPs.
Well, I think in any big organisation, there are those people who are enthusiastic and those people who resist change. So I think there have been some problems and there have been some issues. But Eskom is also stuck between a rock and a hard place, in that they are controlled by government policy and government rules and regulations. And I think that we really have, as the private sector, not stepped up to the plate quickly enough to help government get the right policies, get the right regulations in place to move forward. So I think there's some blame on Eskom's part, but I think there's some blame on the rest of us who sit and complain rather than stepping up to the plate and trying to facilitate things. And the whole confusion about the independent system and market operator that's now coming about, that whole program has been put back 3 years, in my view, because people weren't prepared to accept that that could operate in Eskom in times of constrained capacity, and insisted that it had to be created as an independent.
Okay. Brian, we're going to pick it up after the break, and Hillary, maybe you can give us your thoughts on what he's said. But we're going to take a short break, and to participate in this discussion, you can send us your comments to 33726, or you can also catch us on our Facebook page. It's Interface on SABC3. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Interface. Tonight we're discussing energy in South Africa. Our guests are Eskom spokesperson Hillary Joffe and also the chairman of the South African National Energy Association, Brian Statham. Hillary, you asked Nersa for 25.9%. They granted you that tariff increase, and then they turn around and they say you can only get 16%. What does that mean for your business?
We would not. We asked for the 16%. Instead of the 25.9%, which Nersa had granted 2 years ago.
Okay, so you requested that.
We requested it, yes. We crunched our numbers. We responded to this change in the economy, the slower economic growth, and to the state president's call to look at options for an electricity price path which would better support economic growth and job creation. So we looked at those options and we looked at our numbers, and I think Eskom has moved on from where it was 2 or 3 years ago when that last application was put in, and the government support has come in to enable us to do it. So a couple of things really enabled us to ask for that lower price increase.
So does that mean that the next increase is also going to be reduced because you've already been granted that as well?
No, the next increase we've not yet applied for.
Okay.
From April next year, we have to apply for the next phase of tariff increases,
so
and we're working on that right now. Look, we are committed, we need as Eskom and indeed as a country to move up towards tariffs which reflect the real cost of producing electricity, because unless we do that, we can't attract the investment we need into the industry. Whether it be by private sector producers or Eskom. It needs to be, the industry and Eskom need to be financially viable and sustainable, and to do that we need cost-reflective tariffs, and we're not there yet. So we are certainly going to continue to get tariff increases which are above inflation for some time to come. The numbers we've certainly not decided yet what to put in for, and we will be looking, I think, for a longer term price path which will give us and the industry and indeed our customers certainty about where prices are going.
Brian, that's the biggest thing for us as South Africans. We want to know how much are we going to pay for this electricity?
Well, I think we've got a major uncertainty here. As I mentioned just now, independent power producers have been invited to come in. They have not yet built anything. And so we don't know. There's still an unknown quantity as to what extent they're going to be able to deliver against their promises. If they can't deliver, we're going to expect Eskom to accelerate their build program to come in and make up the shortfall. Otherwise, we're definitely going to run out of capacity. And if we ask Eskom to accelerate their capacity and accelerate their build program, then we can't hope for increases in the teens, because their coffers are going to need to be topped up quickly. But the other issue we've got to watch out for is we shouldn't only be talking about electricity, we must be talking about energy. Because if we do end up switching away from electricity, what do we go to? In the households, you're going to LPG gas. We know there's been shortages of that. We can't keep up with capacity on that. We know that if there's a demand for electricity, Eskom ends up burning its gas turbines in Ankerlig and Gerib, and those stations consume diesel. which is needed for the transport sector, the agricultural sector, and other sectors. So we can't look at electricity in isolation. We have to look at the total integrated energy picture.
Speaking of that totality, we spoke earlier in the insert about the need for support for SMMEs and also just the country not paying so much because that affects economic growth, not paying so much for electricity, that is. Can Eskom realistically achieve what the president asked for in the State of the Nation address, which is to have them really taking a look at their tariffs so that they support growth in the country? Can they really do that?
Well, they can, provided that they have long-term prospects and long-term certainty and long-term plans. Eskom is no different to any other investor. If you start moving the goalposts every second year, then they've got to plan for contingencies. And when you start planning for contingencies, that becomes expensive. If you say to Eskom, you are guaranteed to be building Medupi, Kusile, the nuclear program, Coal 3, Coal 4 over the next 25 years, this is guaranteed, then they can plan their cash flow. But by the same token, then the independents and the oil refineries, the oil majors and the other players can also then come in and plan. And that's one of the things we have not been good at in this country up to now, is defining clearly what the roles are and having long-term goals. Now the IRP 2010 started down that road and it's made some substantial moves. And then last week we saw the start of an integrated energy planning process for the government. Move is in the right direction, but we still have to see whether they actually produce the expected results.
Brian is speaking about cash flow and all of those good things and investment. And then you get a ratings agency like Moody's saying, you know, the fact that you've had a reduction in the tariff puts you on a credit negative. They don't actually downgrade you, but those comments themselves, you know, will affect your ability to raise funds on the debt markets and elsewhere. What do you make of what Moody's has said and relating that to your ability to raise capital?
I think what has been encouraging from the rating agencies, we did visit them in London after the tariff increase was changed a couple of weeks ago. What has been encouraging is they accept that the lower increase will still enable us to complete the build program, which really South Africa needs if we're going to provide the electricity which we need to support growth and job creation. But the rating agencies have issued warning notes, if you like, saying, look, this is okay, we've heard your story and we've heard that you can still be financially viable and complete your program and complete your funding at these lower rates of increase. But you still need to move towards cost-reflective tariffs. And what we're looking to Eskom to do, the rating agencies are telling us, is to continue on that path. So I think it's a positive and a warning note, which we certainly as Eskom are taking heed of, and we will be looking at when we put in our next tariff application.
And Hilary, just before we go to break, Brian is saying that the problem in South Africa is that we haven't planned properly in terms of how we're going to meet the demands of the country using everybody that is available to support us from a power perspective. What do you say to that?
Electricity is a long-term game. Indeed, infrastructure is really a long-term game, and it does require a planning horizon which is beyond the tenure of certainly most politicians. So that requires quite a lot of courage to think that far ahead, but we have to. I think we made the mistake before as a country of not planning for growth in electricity demand and not building fast enough.
But are you comfortable with the way we're planning at the moment?
No, look, there's nothing on the drawing board at this moment beyond Kusile, which we plan to complete by 2018, 2019. Now we need as a country to be planning what are we going to build next after that. Okay. And I think the integrated resource plan gives us the framework to do it, but what we've got to do is make it happen as a country.
Let's hold it there. We'll be right back after this break. You can join this discussion by sending your comments to 33726 and also looking us up on our Facebook page, Interface on SABC3. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are still continuing our discussion on the energy sector in South Africa. And Hilary, let's just pick it up from where we left off. First, let's start with one of our Facebook questions. Somebody's asking, why is it that you're still asking for tariff increases after posting billions in profits?
Indeed, important question. those profits or surpluses are really what we need to reinvest in the business. If we go, this is the biggest build program that South Africa has ever undertaken. We fund most of it with debt. By the end of it, we will have run up 400 billion rand of debt. We have nearly 200 billion now. But to support that amount of debt, you need to generate quite strong amounts of cash so that you can meet the interest and repayment commitments long term. So that surpluses, those profits are being reinvested, if you like, in the infrastructure that we are building for the country.
Is there any truth, though, to some of the news that we've been reading that actually this build program could cost up to the trillions? That what you've put on the table so far is not even a fraction of what it's going to cost?
I think that's looking over the next 20 years. I think the numbers that we've given for our current build program, which are pretty steep as it is, are pretty stable, and we were quite far advanced in that program, so we've got a pretty good handle on what it's going to cost. I think the numbers in the telephone numbers that you're seeing really are the estimates, and at this point they really are purely estimates for what the integrated resource plan over the next 20 years could cost the country.
Brian, I want us to talk about what Andrew Kenny said in the package that we played, and that is that Eskom is not really living up to what it's saying in terms of going green. And we had COP17 in December, and we had all of the promises that South Africa has committed to cutting carbon emissions. And then you hear that Eskom is building Kusile and Medupi coal-fired stations. What does that say?
Look, the country had no choice but to build those coal-fired power stations. We needed to get in to massive base load. Renewable energy won't solve the problem for the massive base load. So they were a given. It didn't matter whether they were built by Eskom or whether they were built by independents, the country needed them. What I think is happening, though, is that Eskom is running late on that part of its program, but it's also running late on its renewable program. It's promised us a wind farm, which we thought was going to be in place before the COP. It's running late. Now, also the government independent power producer program is running late. So as a nation, we're running late in terms of moving towards renewables. But we should never expect that we can live only on renewables or only on coal or only on nuclear. Our country is so diverse, the needs are so diverse, we need all forms of energy, and each form has its particular niche. In terms of the cost-reflective tariffs, I just want to touch on that for a moment, because we forget that there are 25% of South Africans who don't have any electricity at all. And moving to cost-reflective tariffs is going to be fine for those people who can afford it. But what's it going to do for those people who are stuck in energy poverty? And it's not only debilitating for them, it's inhibiting healthcare, it's inhibiting education, it's inhibiting economic activity. So I think that cost-reflective tariffs are an ideal to work towards, but for a long time to come, we are still going to have a distorted pricing structure in our country in order to create the social and economic development.
We accept that. Hilary, I mean, let's just get back to the energy mix. I'm glad that it's Brian and not you that said that you needed to go ahead with those coal-fired power stations. But in terms of the complete mix, including nuclear, can we really go ahead with the nuclear program with Fukushima in Japan just having happened?
Look, I think we need to balance. There are a whole lot of imperatives which we have to balance as Eskom and as a country. We're committed to addressing climate change, but that's just one of the imperatives which we look at. We need an affordable supply of power. We need a secure supply of power. We need an accessible supply of power so that the millions who don't have it can get it. And we need a cleaner supply of power. And that requires, yes, that we diversify the mix, that we bring in nuclear, that we bring in renewables, that we bring in imported hydro and
fears around nuclear.
Yeah, look, I think we can talk about that. We can come back to that one. But I think the important thing about addressing the climate change challenge is that it's not only about the mix that you build. It's also about issues like water. You know, in a water-scarce country such as South Africa, the adaptation to climate change issues really become a big thing. So, for example, the fact that our new coal-fired power stations are much more efficient in the way they use water than the old is quite important to us. They're also more efficient in the way that they use coal, and certainly compared to our old power stations, they are cleaner
I wish we had more time for this discussion. There's so much more we could touch on, but I'm glad that you have at least put us at ease that we're not likely to see any blackouts, touch wood, in 2012 and going forward. Thank you so much to both of you for having joined us here on Interface, and all the best to Eskom in keeping the lights on in our homes and in our businesses. Well, that's all for tonight from Interface. We'll be back next week. Remember, you can email us, interface on sabc3.co.za. Also, you can catch us on our Facebook page, and you can keep those comments coming through. From me, Tembisa Magele, and the team, good night.